My name's Spencer Stewart. I'm a part of the board of the Alcuin Society. And I noticed on the sign up this evening that we have some members, but we also have some new people that may not be entirely familiar with the Alcuin Society. So before we get underway, just a little bit about us. We were founded in 1965, and the Society is the only nonprofit organization in Canada dedicated to the entire range of interests related to books and reading. Amphora, the Society's journal, which is published 3 times a year, covers topics that include authorship, publishing, book design and production, the history of the book, libraries, ephemera, book selling, book buying. The list really goes on. We are also engaged with typography, type design, printing, binding, paper making, etc. To further its aims, the Alcuin Society engages in a wide range of educational activities, not only through the virtual series that we're doing monthly, but also through other sessions when time allows. And we do that in concert with a lot of educational institutions across the country. The Alcuin Society's annual awards for the excellence in book design in Canada is the only national competition of its kind that recognizes and celebrates the art of the book and design in Canada. And the winners of this award represent the nation at the international exhibitions and competition at the Frankfurt and Leipzig book fairs that are held annually in Germany. And the Society also offers the Robert R. Reed Award and medal to recognize lifetime achievement in or extraordinary contributions to book arts in Canada. So if you're not a member of the Society, we encourage you to visit our site. I'll put the link in the chat during the session. And this evening, I'd like to also extend a thanks to Gina Page, who's the program director for the Alcuin Society, and has done a really good job of inviting various people to these sessions. And so we'll continue doing them, and we'll continue putting out announcements for them as they continue, but really could not have done this without her work there. So again, question and answer. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll try and get to all of them after Guy's session. And I hand it over now to Richard Hopkins for an introduction of Guy and the session that we'll be having this evening. And again, thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to be introducing my friend Guy. We've been friends for decades now. We shared the same mentor in Dr. Roy Stokes, who's an international expert in bibliography and books. But I'd better be careful because Guy is introducing me a couple of weeks from now. Be careful what I say. And that's a warning. I'm the next speaker, so you may take that into consideration. But Guy is a consummate book person. First of all, he reads. That's the most important part, is the reading. You know, if you collect and you don't read, that's a bit odd. But Guy, it's not only a reader, he is a collector. He lectures on quite often on the history of the book. And he is a disaster planner and spends a fair amount of his time protecting library books from destruction, which is a very worthy thing. So all in all, that's pretty impressive book career that Guy has. I'm going to read now from a prepared text, setting up tonight's meeting. Some of you may have read it, some may not. But it says, literary fraud and forgery are as old as the written word. The motives for these crimes include the desire for revenge, self-promotion, and above all, for money. Many instances of forgery remain undetected or unacknowledged, and those who collect books and manuscripts must be circumspect when purchasing inscribed copies of works by noteworthy authors. Although in my book business, I get a bit a bit impatient with people who ask me, they're buying a $20 signed book and they're asking me if it's a forgery. Well, it'd have to be worth more than that to take trouble to do a forge signature. In Tennyson's Ballpoint Pen, that's the title of the presentation, Observations and Warnings for Book Collectors and Librarians, Guy Robertson will discuss fraud and how it occurs in different institutions. He will concentrate on bogus signatures and other inscriptions, including marginalia and collectible books. He will cover the following subtopics: a history of forgery, necessarily incomplete, of bibliofraud. He could spend many hours, but he will give you an overview. Forgery techniques, taste, trends in the market, forgery and the law, and protecting yourself and your institution from forgery. If you get a Charles Dickens signed in felt pen, you might question it. Teacher, author, and consultant in information security and emergency management, Guy Robertson has lectured on fraud and forgery at colleges, universities, and conferences across North America. He has developed forgery detection procedures for libraries, archives, and historical societies, and worked with rare book specialists, museum and gallery curators, and private collectors. He specializes in the signatures and inscriptions in work by novelists, poets, and playwrights, as well as noted scientists, politicians, and celebrities. You'll have to help me. Right now I have a signed book and photograph signed by Nelson Mandela, and I think it's legit. He investigates the historical background of handwritten material for the purposes of determining its value and confirming or denying its authenticity. Important work and fascinating kind of work to do. So I turn the screen over, I guess, to Guy Robertson.
Thank you very much, Richard. And thanks to you all for joining me this evening. As you know, my topic is forgery, specifically the forging of bogus signatures and inscriptions on literary and other publications. A quick note here about where I was trained in these matters. Richard mentioned Professor Roy Stokes, who was a noted bibliographer, specialist in theater manuscripts in particular, but he was also attached to British naval intelligence during the Second War, and he knew a good deal about codes and handwriting and other such things. And in my advisors' meetings with him, he would digress on those particular topics, and I certainly was interested in what he had to say. Another teacher is someone with whom many of you are familiar, the late William Hoffer, bookseller. I used to go around Mr. Hoffer's shop when I was in high school, and he would lecture me on various aspects of book collecting and on signatures and on forgeries and other such matters. He was very knowledgeable on these particular topics. Certainly his business drew the attention of many collectors, whom I think he did his best to protect from various kinds of forgeries. One other teacher I had, whose advice I certainly value for his concentration on modern forgeries, is the well-known Frank Abagnale, author of Catch Me If You Can. He and I met years ago when he came to Vancouver to lecture to financial institutions with regard to forgery. I had written a couple of articles on check forgery, which at that time was a very serious concern. I guess it still is, but then it was more common. And he and I got together, and he brought me up to date in certain ways. He was a very, very successful forger, but interestingly, he was not the most technically proficient. in that particular area. And as he told me, and I will tell you, technical proficiency in forging is not absolutely essential, particularly in modern documents. There are ways to sell your forged wares without worrying so much about whether or not the buyer will focus on the descending loops, the slant of a particular handwriting, those types of things, the technical aspects. My purpose generally is to introduce you to the ways in which forgers carry out their activities and to discuss the risk to libraries, archives, book dealers, and collectors. I will refer to various cases of forgery that have come to my attention over the years and describe a method, rather generic method, of detecting forged signatures and inscriptions in books. I have to say at the very beginning, I lecture quite widely on aspects of fraud, different kinds, including plagiarism, different kinds of forgery, and book theft as well. And I have to tell you at the beginning that I do not intend, it is not my intention to teach you how to commit any of these crimes. I will have to talk about methods of committing these crimes, but I am certainly not encouraging you to engage in them, to engage in any of these or other immoral, fraudulent, or criminal activities. Having said that, I have to admit that the number of frauds I have known, and I've known a number who have actually been prosecuted for crimes, I can count them on two hands, fingers of two hands. This kind of criminal behavior is very, very hard to prosecute because of a lack of evidence in most cases. And forgery in particular is particularly difficult to spot. Please note that I'm obliged to respect the privacy of various individuals and the confidentiality of a number of institutions that have allowed me to examine forged items that they have acquired for their collections. My aim is not to embarrass anybody who has been duped by a forger and who has paid substantial amounts for forgeries, but I hope to impress on you the fact that, like other forms of fraud, forgery appears to be more common than ever now, and that we must be careful when purchasing items whose provenance is sketchy. At some points, however, I must describe techniques, of course, that forgers use. One technique is very popular among forgers and other frauds is self-promotion through bogus credentials. Repeat, self-promotion through bogus credentials. Spencer, may we have the first slide, please? Can you see that? Okay, second slide. Bingo, let's stop there. This is presented by Guy M. Robertson, MA, DPhil, Oxford. And you heard Richard give my credentials of one sort or another. He didn't go into specifics. This is very impressive, isn't it? DPhil from Oxford. Nothing on this slide is true. It's all false. I do not have an MA or DPhil from Oxford. I visit the university every year or so, maybe a couple of times a year. I have a visit to the Ashmolean Museum. I visit acquaintances in the Bodleian Library. I then go to Blackwell's bookshop and spend far too much money and spend time as well talking to the people behind the counter. However, in presenting this slide to you, it's rather interesting. People will take this at face value in many cases. I'm asking you not to, but I could put anything up here. How did I put this together? Well, for example, I say that I've lectured at Oxford, LSE, Stanford, and the University of Chicago. Not so. I currently hold the Weaver Chair of History, etc., and the Swinton Professorship at the University of Texas at Austin. Weaver and Swinton are two actors whom I like, Sigourney Weaver and Tilda Swinton. There are no such chairs one way or another. Author of more than 150 papers on bibliographic history, not so, and related topics. Dr. Robertson, I am not a doctor, is an internationally recognized expert on forgery. Well, who knows, maybe that's a little bit closer to the truth. But the way I present this material here can be especially convincing if I'm talking to a North American audience. Interestingly, a British audience would look at this with just a little bit of skepticism, really. The defill is, as far as many academics are concerned, is not necessary, particularly, and the listing of chairs and other such is not particularly necessary either. Actually, something like this may raise misgivings among certain members of an audience. Spencer, may we have the next slide, please? And so if challenged, I have to tell you that, yes, I was at Christ Church. I don't say Christ Church College because that's a giveaway. If you are British, you refer to Christ Church, which means Christ Church College, Oxford. And here I can, expatiate freely on, yes, that's the Tom Tower. And I remember well my days at Christ Church. Oh, did you know somebody at, no, he was on a different staircase. He was a tenant of a different part of the college at that point. I can name people who taught there, various professors and readers and things like that. I can sound authentic. And as a fraud, that's what I should like to do. It's all very easy to come up with bogus credentials these days and to present them to audiences. And incidentally, there is nothing criminal in doing this. There's nothing necessarily in the Criminal Code of Canada that says that you can't come up with something like this. Frauds use this for a number of reasons. One good reason is to establish credentials in case you need to go into a library, a special collections department, and you want to be able to say, yes, I'm Dr. Robertson. And here is a letter of introduction from a colleague at the Bodleian, and I present a letter which is completely bogus, typed out, but there's a nice little signature at the bottom, the current head of the or the keeper of the Western manuscripts at the Bodleian Library, and the people in special collections look at that and go, oh, this guy must be legit. Does this happen frequently? Yes, it does, more often, of course, in the United States than in Canada, but there are suggestions that it is becoming a risk here. As I say, frauds and forgers are adept, can be adept at providing information like this and coming up with lots of bogus background information. Okay, now, they also use this to promote sales of one sort or another, because the main purpose of forgery these days is to make money. I can say as a fraud, oh yes, I was at Christ Church. You know, I have a very nice little signed Auden, first edition of The Age of Anxiety. Of course, I don't have it with me, but I could bring it with me in a couple of days if you'd like to see it. I'm not interested in keeping it. I'd be happy to sell it to you if you don't. So now you've got an Oxford graduate and scholar who's coming around with a very famous title by a noted British poet, which is apparently signed. That's the setup, to which you say, does this actually work? To which I would say, oh, it does. It certainly does. Let's begin with a more general overview of fraud. As I mentioned, it is these days for the mostly for the purpose of raising money. The examples I'm giving you are largely modern literature, very modern literature actually, to which you might ask, well, why don't people forge Magna Carta? Why don't they try to forge the Lindisfarne Gospels, or the Luttrell Psalter? To which I would say there have been attempts to forge these very famous manuscripts, but remember that your purpose as a forger is to make money for the most part, and to develop a successful and convincing forgery of something like Magna Carta is going to take an awful lot of work. In fact, even the most humble medieval manuscript can take a great deal of work and time. And there are too many risks of detection when you do that. You can spend a year or two working on a medieval manuscript, cut to the chase. You can probably come up with a bogus signed Auden or T.S. Eliot or Joseph Heller or name your modern author much faster and realize a profit from that, rather than taking all sorts of risks with something that could be easily detected. Please note that once upon a time, even before the Second World War, let's say, forgery was well, it was a risk certainly for buyers, but it was not nearly as common as it is now. We see an increase in forging activity, particularly after the Second World War, and not just in literary manuscripts, but also in artworks. This was a particular concern. You hear about all sorts of attempts to come up with bogus Picassos. Picasso is regularly forged by frauds of one sort or another. Picasso's signature is reasonably easy to forge as well. As for political signatures, you will find all sorts of examples of FDR's, Franklin Roosevelt's signature. You'll find Churchill's signature quite regularly. I've found a number of forged Churchill signatures. Possibly the most common forgery is Adolf Hitler's, which you find more and more now on things such as, well, copies of his Mein Kampf, but also on documents including citations for various Nazi decorations, iron crosses, knight's crosses. You'll find his signature on photographs, photographs of Der Fuhrer. These can easily be produced. His bogus signatures can also be quite easily spotted. Forgers sometimes make the mistake of putting Adolf Hitler's early signature on a photograph of Hitler as he got older. When he became a leader of the Nazi Party, he changed his signature, I think, fairly substantially. It's much more jagged and with a different slant altogether. His signature as a young man had far more fluency one way or another. And, you can actually put genuine signatures of all of these people, FDR, Churchill, Adolf Hitler, you name it, Picasso, and you will see that as they age, their signatures will change. Sometimes they intend to make those changes. Hitler certainly did. He wanted his signature to look more powerful, whereas Picasso was usually in a hurry to sign his prints and drawings and things like that. So he was more rushed. Plagiarism, forgery now is an industry, and I fear that it is growing at quite a pace, along with other forms of fraud. Plagiarism, which once was a matter of a student copying material out of an encyclopedia and getting caught by the prof. Now, if you're a university instructor or professor, you know that it is an industry, a very, very revenue generating industry. Near every college and university on this continent, there are people who are prepared to provide students with material that those students did not write themselves. As I say, it is now an industry and one that generates a lot of revenue. The business of forging literary signatures. Spencer, may we have the next slide, please? Here we have the copy of a signature. Probably you're well familiar with the work of Margaret Atwood, Canada's probably best known novelist. And here you have a signature which looks authentic. What I want you to look at is that sticker off to the side, which says signed first edition. You look at that and you think, wow. However, you have to be very careful here because a forger can forge not only the signature, but also can get a printer to come up with a roll of stickers saying signed first edition, or authentic signed first edition, or genuine signed copy, or what have you. In a case recently in Britain, the people who had nefarious intentions didn't even bother to do that. What they did was they reached over the counter of the bookseller, the bookseller's shop, and grabbed a roll of these signed first edition stickers and disappeared with them. And I have no idea where those little stickers ended up. All right, take a look at that signature. Spencer, may we have the next slide, please? Now, how about this signature? Here we have an early collection of Margaret Atwood's work. You may be familiar with Power Politics. And we don't have a little sticker there saying this is the real thing. What we have off to the side, which is attractive, is a stamp. As you see, it's the stamp of the Nanaimo Women's Resources Society. You also see other signatures here of owners, and you think to yourself, if you're a buyer, well, gosh, Margaret Atwood probably visited that Women's Resources Center, and she put her signature right at the top there. Look at that. It looks like her signature, doesn't it? It certainly does. All right, Spencer, may we have, please, the previous slide? Take a look at that signature. Spencer, may we have the following slide, please? Now, I ask you, which of these is genuine? One of them is bogus. Okay, you needn't say which one is the real thing here. I will tell you, what you're looking at is a forgery right now. That signature was produced by a Vancouver graphic artist who took a look at an authentic signature of Margaret Atwood's and practiced for, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes, and produced the signature that you see at the top here. That graphic designer happens to be my wife. So just for full disclosure here, the thing here is that I could take that and I could put it in front of any number of CanLit specialists, and I could say, which one is authentic? And they might not be able to tell. In fact, I would say that the majority would not be able to tell which is authentic and which is not. They're both fairly close. How would you discover which one was actually authentic? Well, you need a magnifying glass. You would have to examine the handwriting very, very carefully. One giveaway here is that Power Politics, as you see, was published in 1971. Dearly was published and signed sometime later. And yet in Dearly, on that title page, Atwood's signature has not aged all that much. And as time goes on, our signatures do age. There are other circumstances that we consider as well, but as people age, their handwriting changes. And here you see two signatures that are a little bit too close together in terms of style. I've mentioned that the purpose of a forgery is to make a profit, but there are other reasons for doing it as well. I mentioned revenge. There are cases that I'm aware of where a forger decides to get back at an institution by selling a forged document to the university library, so that in one case, a young man did not finish his MA thesis, and he was basically tossed out of the MA program at his university. And so he forged a number of documents and a number of signatures on various title pages, and made sure that they ended up in a certain special collections division in the library. This was his way of getting back at the people who had, as far as he was concerned, deprived him of a career as a scholar. How often does that occur? I don't have stats on any of this. Much of the evidence that I have is anecdotal. I have to keep in mind as well that many, many, many cases of forgery are not discussed. They are not, it is not in the interest, shall we say, of the institutions that have purchased the forgeries to advertise that fact. I'll give you a case of artwork forgery here, which illustrates things, I think, very nicely. Once upon a time, years ago, I worked as an archivist for a financial firm. And one day I walked into the lobby on my way to the archives office, and I noticed on the wall a painting which was supposed to be an abstract, and it was terrible. It was just awful. And I said to the receptionist, when did that arrive? And she said, oh, well, that was bought actually for quite a bit of money, and it's a work by a fairly famous artist. And I said, oh, really? Who? And she named someone whom I'd never heard of before. And she said, well, you know, there are paintings all over the office now. Go up to the second floor. And yes, there were these paintings, artworks on various walls. And I thought to myself that the artist didn't even know how to mix his or her paint properly. So I went to the president of the company and I said, what are you doing? Look, this is not good. There's something wrong with these paintings. I don't know who the painter is. I had done a bit of a check to see if he was on any Canadian artists directory. I couldn't find that name. The president said to me, you know, how dare you question the opinions and judgment of our art acquisitions committee? We've spent tens of thousands of dollars. They'd spent a lot of money on these. How could you question this? I don't want to talk about it. You're an archivist. What do you know? So I still had my suspicions about this, and I did a little bit more research, and I discovered the source of these paintings was in fact the park in Vancouver, Stanley Park. If you're a Vancouverite, you know that if you go to Stanley Park, there are amateur artists who go and paint the landscape and the seascape and things like that. A certain senior manager had gone down to Stanley Park, and he found some character who basically threw paint at a canvas without any notion of composition or color or palette or whatever. So this senior manager said, hey, look, you throw the paint at the canvas, I'll give you $50 a piece. The artist said, oh, sure, fine. This manager took these paintings back to the company and said, I've just purchased these abstracts by John Doe, and a noted Canadian artist, and I paid for it out of my own pocket, so I'd like reimbursement for, well, we got them at a real bargain price of $175,000. Oh, that's great. Well, that's fine. We'll take these paintings and we'll put them around the office and things like that. The point here is that after this fraud was exposed, and these paintings were identified for what they were, the board got this senior manager in and said, okay, we got you. We found out what you were doing, and you're in trouble. To which this senior manager, really a professional fraud, said, that's fine, I'm caught. But that doesn't go outside this room, because if it does, I will be in touch with a number of journalists whom I know. You don't with this story coming out in the Globe and Mail, do you? Okay. Embarrassment is a big factor and a good reason why so many forgeries in art and in literature are not exposed. Incidentally, those bogus paintings ended up in my archives at that point. I think they may still be there. I haven't, I left that company decades ago, but I'm sure those forgeries are still there. That happens actually quite regularly. And the manager who committed that fraud actually had the gall to ask for a buyout, which they gave him. He then went to work for a variety of other firms, and I saw him a few years ago wandering around downtown Vancouver. Could he be prosecuted for something like this? You could try, but cases like this are very hard to prosecute and often unsuccessful. There are all sorts of problems that we need not get into here with the evidence. Now, thank you, Spencer. There are ways to find out for certain if something is the genuine article. I emphasize the importance of a good supplier. The ones I refer to here are largely British. This is a signed copy of a book by the novelist A.N. Wilson. This is from Hatchard's, which is one of the oldest bookshops in the English-speaking world. It's in Piccadilly in London. Hatchard's sells signed copies, which I think is an idea that they picked up from the habit of certain authors who shopped at Hatchard's, who had accounts there. And so people like A.S. Byatt, or in this case, A.N. Wilson, or various other poets and writers, travel writers in particular, would come in to buy whatever they wanted. And the proprietors of Hatchard's would say, we would like you to sign these if that's all right. To which the authors would say, sure, that's fine. Hatchard's has actually made a business of this. Spencer, may we have the next slide, please? Here you see a signed title page here, and that is the real deal. That is A.N. Wilson's signature. I can certainly verify that because I watched him sign it. So I'm certain that this is a genuine copy of his Dante in Love. We find other bookshops doing this as well. Next slide, please. Here we have Christopher Lloyd's In Search of a Manuscript. Here we have the signed copy wrapper. This is from actually Waterston's up the street from Hatchard's. And by the way, Waterston's now owns Hatchard's, and they're all in the business of selling signed copies. I think as well, Blackwell's has gotten into this business too. In fact, Blackwell's Oxford has an antiquarian counter, a department, in which they take great care to come up with authentic materials. Next slide, please, Spencer. This is certainly Christopher Lloyd's signature, his best effort, if you will. It's still fairly clear and legible on the half title here. Now, if I am to, as a forger, to forge something like this, it's going to take me time to get that particular signature down pat. One point here, which a lot of amateurs don't realize, there's a lot in your breathing. When you are imitating a signature, you have to get your breathing down right. You'll find that if you're gasping a bit, your handwriting will become a little bit jerky. You should, like the author who's just scribbling that at fairly high speed, be able to execute that signature really in one breath or a half breath. It shouldn't take you very long at all. When you are first practicing forged signatures, it may take you some time. Of course, everybody's different here. The graphic designer who forged Margaret Atwood's signature has an eye for this kind of thing. Other forgers might not certainly have the same kind of experience or skill. One of the matters here that we have to take into account is how we identify forgeries, what we look for. Can we get the next slide, please? Right. What we determine, if at all possible, is the author's usual handwriting style in correspondence and drafts and things like that. Here, a special collections librarian can have an advantage because he or she can have other examples of an author's handwriting. Example in British Columbia, at the University of British Columbia in special collections, we have the Malcolm Lowry collection, which contains many examples of Lowry's handwriting, which I find fascinating, largely because Lowry had a number of health problems, certainly, in part due to his alcoholism, and his handwriting is actually pretty good for someone who had a drinking problem. However, having said that, if you know about Lowry, you'll know that very often when he was writing, he didn't drink at all. He became teetotal, at least that is what his biographers have said. And so his handwriting clears up. I have seen examples of notes that he had scribbled where the handwriting very, very poor. And handwriting, other examples in which his handwriting is very, very good. I have seen the handwriting of other authors who have had drinking problems. F. Scott Fitzgerald is a classic example here. People note that Fitzgerald's spelling was dreadful. Yes, it was, but he was all too often half cut when he wrote anything. His drafts are really something else. And his the number of typos is also something worth noting. His handwriting is sometimes all over the place. The same is true of the late John Berryman. So there are handwriting issues here that we have to take into account. Ideally, we will have various samples of an author's handwriting that will allow us to make a judgment with regard to whether that handwriting sample is genuine. Keep in mind as well that age and health will have an influence on that handwriting. An author's signature style can differ in many ways from his or her usual handwriting, usually because the signatures are executed so quickly, right? We move at speed. Whereas if we are making notes that we have to read, I'm thinking of myself here as I read some of my notes and marginalia, I try to make my handwriting as clear as possible. Whereas these days, very often, signatures really can be scribbled. I have mentioned the attention to writing equipment. I'm thinking in particular of pens and inks and papers. A forger has to get these things right. Tennyson did not write with a ballpoint pen, obviously. I have seen, however, a forged signature of Henry James. The forger had used a gel pen. All right, now Henry James did not use a gel pen. Moreover, at the time that the document, he was supposed to have created that document. Actually, he dictated most of what he had to write. And his signature was really all over the place. I believe that Henry James had a series of what we now call strokes before he had his final illness, and he passed away. This in the middle of the First World War. So we have to pay attention to the actual materials, the kind of pen, in particular, the nib and the nib width. Certain authors use nibs of a certain width. I think of T.S. Eliot here, who used the same kind of pen for many years when he worked as an editor, when he was at Faber and Faber. And he used a certain kind of ink as well. He used a good solid black India ink, occasionally something lighter for some correspondence. As for papers, he would prefer certain kinds of stationery. There's the standard business stationery that he used, but there was personal stationery as well. I have seen a letter that he wrote from a hotel on the hotel's stationery. You have to take into account all of the different kinds of variations that an author would use, and use those variations in determining whether or not a signature in front of you is in fact genuine. This, of course, is very hard work, and it can be very difficult to get all these different signatures together. I think of myself as reasonably knowledgeable about T.S. Eliot's handwriting, but to be honest with you, I have limitations. His early handwriting, I'm not all that good on, quite frankly. And I'm not sure about his punctuation. There are different kinds of different ways of punctuating things, the way you shape your comma, the way that you use a semicolon or colon, the way you use you make a period on the page. Some people stamp, other people even sort of sketch a little period very, very quickly. You also have to take into account the circumstances in which signatures and inscriptions are made. If you're dealing with a popular author like Margaret Atwood, and she's at a book signing, she signs book signing signatures at lightning pace. Other authors can do the same thing. Often, all you get from some authors is a squiggle, which is reasonably easy for a forger to duplicate. One area here that has come to my attention as a matter of some concern is forgeries supplied for the purposes of gift giving. In the corporate world, there can be gifts of literary authors. For example, a British firm decides to give as a gift a signed work by William Faulkner to a customer in Asia. All right. One has to be very careful with these things because the forging of signatures by Faulkner has become more common as there are more gifts in this regard. I take it that the customer was dedicated to the study of William Faulkner and would appreciate something signed by that noted and Nobel Prize winning writer. However, there is a fast way to achieve a signature here, and forgers are well aware of this kind of thing. There was a character back east, actually in Toronto and Montreal, who was offering signed works to various corporations. And I haven't heard about him lately, but I know that he was successful in selling at fairly impressive prices, selling items for gift-giving purposes. Having talked about the skills that one requires to produce forgeries, I should mention something that Frank Abagnale taught me, which is many forgeries do not have to be first rate. In fact, they can be very, very poor, quite frankly. Forgeries are saleable in part owing to the persuasion of the person selling. Mr. Abagnale himself was a very persuasive forger in his time. I think he had tremendous charisma. He was a very, very fine speaker. But when he addressed audience of one sort or another, they would simply lap up what he had to tell them. I remember that, having attended a number of his seminars and speeches, and having talked to him as well, just person to person. He was very, very convincing. And as he pointed out to me, look, if you don't have time to produce a particular signature and inscription, so what? There are people who really want to buy something like this. And quite frankly, they have more money than discernment. They're not going to do a background check, quite frankly. The object of the forger is to get that money in hand, that check in hand, and to cash it quickly. And if someone wanders away with that forgery and believes it to be the real thing, okay, that's really not the forger's particular concern, as long as that forger does not find himself being pursued in some ways. Now, next slide, please. Once upon a time, forgers, and I'm thinking right up through the 1960s to the early 70s, the tools that forgers would use would include photography. I mentioned here the famous Minox cameras that were used. These were very, very small and compact. You could put them in your breast pockets and carry them around. And the quality of photography was pretty high if you had the right lighting, which various libraries were willing to provide. Other forgers used Polaroid photography for their purposes. They would use photocopying. They still do to some extent. We find instances of tracing. So forgers would take tracing paper into the special collections. And by the way, if you work in a special collections department, as you know, it's a good idea to keep your eyes on people working in the public area. You may say, well, we have a CCTV camera in there and people wouldn't dare try to trace a signature or inscription. Not good enough. Forgers are, like shoplifters, not particularly worried about CCTV, and they can do a tracing very, very quickly. And I find that monitoring CCTV in libraries is not done all that well. Libraries are not retail operations particularly, and librarians tend to ignore, and archivists tend to ignore CCTV images. There are lots of cases of theft, right? Okay, I don't have time here to trace this. So what I'll do is I will simply tear out the title page. That's easy enough to do. I can fold it up and put it in my pocket. That's no problem at all. There have been cases, incidentally, in Canada and the US of people intending to commit forgery, actually taking signed volumes into the washroom near the special collections. The librarians have let them do this. So they simply walk in, tear out the paper, and return with the book. Thanks very much. You can return it to the stacks. That's an instance of theft. Of course, there are also instances where thieves will steal the entire work. Forgers also used to take pains to use the pens and ink, similar to what a genuine and particular author would use. Forgers loved libraries, by the way, and they used library services. I remember Frank Abagnale telling me that he had a big collection of library cards because librarians were so helpful. Now, he was committing financial fraud. What he would do is he would walk into a library, he'd go to the business reference desk, and he would say, I want the annual report for 3M Corporation. The librarian would say, sure, here's this year's annual report for 3M. Frank would open up the annual report, and there would be the signatures of the chair of the board and the CEO and chief operating officer right there. Fine, take that to the photocopier, photocopy those signatures, and then you can put them right on to a series of checks, if you will. And by the way, it was once upon a time very easy to produce a nice set of checks with that 3M or IBM or what have you logo, university logos, if you will. That was easy enough to do, and then you just plunk the signature right onto the check. And I've already mentioned bogus letters of introduction. These are certainly easy to obtain, all too easy. Can I have the next slide, please? Right. These days, however, forgers can rely on digital scanning and transfer. There are cases where the forger will say, look, could you scan an image of a particular title page for one with a signature? Just send it to me as a PDF. Oh, sure. No, we'll do that for you. We intend to serve. So we have, of course, internet access and copying. We have photography. I've mentioned Polaroid and Minox cameras. Nowadays, for heaven's sake, we have cell phones that can produce really good images of signatures, often in substandard lighting. I've mentioned library cards, certainly. I've mentioned bogus letters of introduction, which, by the way, are becoming more and more common. And I've mentioned forms of social engineering, which include the bogus bio that I started with, the bogus letters of introduction. Of course, you can easily produce a bogus set of business cards. If you're a forger, it is in your interest to be alone with the signature, the inscription, the marginalia that you wish to forge. And ideally, you noble professor, you can find a desk, and the librarians, the archivists will simply leave you alone. And you can photograph that to your heart's content, but you've got to be convincing. May I have the next slide, please? Aha. Social engineering includes the right kind of apparel. And there have been a couple of cases in Canada where this has been used within the past couple of years that I know of. Here you see a tie produced by Cambridge University. I picked this up for £1, about $1.75, in a thrift shop in actually the Oxfam thrift shop in Marylebone in London. You can find these kinds of ties all over the place. And you will see that people respect them one way or another. One forger I know of has ties not only from Cambridge, but also from various Cambridge colleges, including Trinity. He has an Oxford tie and a Magdalen College tie. I think the one that I find vaguely amusing, maybe I shouldn't find it amusing, but he has a couple of guards ties too. If you were a soldier in a guards regiment, eventually, especially if you were an officer, you would get a guards tie. And so this character has a tie from the Coldstream Guards, or what the British call the Coldstream. If this character wants a good seat in a restaurant, he puts that tie on. The maitre d' takes a look at that tie and realizes, of course, that he has to give this soldier, this honorable guards member, a good table. And so that's what that has been used for, certainly. But you find people using these forms of apparel actually quite subtly. If you're going to misrepresent yourself as a university professor, you have to look a certain way. For example, if you're a senior professor, and this has been explained to me at some length, yes, you can wear a good suit, but it helps if it's a little bit shiny in places. If you wear a tweed jacket, it's probably best that the elbows are a bit worn too, and the tie counts for a great deal. And yes, people do recognize these ties of one sort or another. Some people ask about having the correct accent. If you have a Cambridge or an Oxford or even a Harvard tie, do you have to speak with an Oxford accent or a Boston accent? Answer, no. If you want to be successful at this, use your standard Canadian accent. Canadians go to these universities. They are alumni of these universities. In fact, at present, I think the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge University is the former CEO of the University of British Columbia, Stephen Toop. These characters get around. I'm not suggesting that Stephen Toop is by any means a fraud, certainly. But these people, as I say, get around and they wear the right kind of apparel, certainly. I mentioned the bogus business cards. Another time and another lecture, I would also talk about bogus degrees, which can also be very common, although we don't need them so much for the purposes of forgery. There are businesses, however, just as a very brief digression, if you want a PhD from a respectable university, or any degree for all that matter, you can get not only the diploma, but what is more important, the transcript that comes with it. And you can also get letters from a couple of very respectable deans who recommend you for your teaching skills and your scholarship. Interestingly enough, the deans who signed those type letters on the university stationery are both deceased. So doing a background check is a little bit more difficult. That's another area altogether. It's a form of increasingly common misrepresentation. Social engineers, people who are interested in either selling forgeries or acquiring access to genuine signatures which they wish to forge, they may use techniques such as hospitality. May I take you to lunch? Sure, there's a nice place down the road, certainly that we could go to, and I'd be love to take you there, and we can talk about your collections, certainly, and what you have and what you might be interested in buying. I'm just in town for a few days. Sorry about that, but I have something that I'd like to show you before I leave. Now, this is salespersonship, which is a fairly standard example of what we refer to as social engineering. This is not to say that forgers don't have various risks that they have to deal with. Next slide, please. This, despite that good-looking Cambridge tie, which incidentally I use for lecture purposes. I do not wear it myself, never have, and I would not do so. Incidentally, if you want to buy a new Cambridge tie, you can do so quite easily in the shops along King's Parade in Cambridge. You can buy all sorts of tourist goodies, including scarves. That Trinity College scarf is very attractive, King's College, etc. Oh yes, I was at King's years ago. I have a signed copy of A Passage to India by Forster. Have you read Passage? I should show that to you, etc. Standard approach. The risks to forgers include running into someone who is actually knowledgeable, a book dealer who has dealt with the works of a particular author. Buyer's expertise can be a risk, which is why forgers have to be very careful with certain book dealers. For example, I would not, if I were a forger or a fraud, take anything to the people behind the counter at Blackwell's in Oxford. They're well aware of these things and well familiar with them. Detection of one sort or another. Interestingly enough, in my experience anyway, it's not the knowledgeable scholar necessarily who has misgivings about the forger. It's perhaps the library technician or library clerical who looks at that character and goes, I'm not sure about that guy. Or, you know, that pair that showed up, they're supposed to be man and wife. They didn't really look like man. I wonder about this. Um, there's where you see intuition kicking in. And intuition is something we'll discuss a little bit more, because it's not to be ignored here. So there is that kind of detection that one has to be careful of, certainly. Exposure, yes, this is a risk, not the most serious, but you get a book dealer saying, this is a load of garbage, that get out of my shop. I know who you are, and that's no good at all. A book dealer who has heard from a book dealer in Regina, who has heard something from a book dealer in Toronto, who's been talking to a woman in Vancouver, who was talking to a librarian at SFU, et cetera, et cetera. Word gets around, and there is such a thing as exposure. If you are a forger and you're exposed, like most frauds, you have to move along. You have to change your approach, which is reasonably easy to do. Frauds do move around actually quite a bit. In a bigger city, such as Toronto, actually you don't have to move all that far, unfortunately. The grapevine is not as strong as it might be about things like this. And then there is, of course, continuing recognition in public. That can happen. We see shoplifters' photographs on the walls of various retail operations. I have not seen the photographs of forgers necessarily, although I wish people would do that. The forger that I mentioned, incidentally, the artwork forger, who created all those dreadful paintings and sold them to that company here, I recognize him to this day. I would recognize him most definitely. I will tell you, he has never been prosecuted. He's gotten away with everything that he has done. The police have been consulted, the commercial crime units, and the commercial crime units say, okay, you're dealing with 80, 100,000 here. We're dealing with fraud in the millions. They'll take your name and your phone number, and really, we've got other considerations here. Thanks for bringing this to our attention, but we're kind of busy. Backlogs in law enforcement are a serious matter here. If a forger is recognized in public, it is most often by someone whom he or she has cheated in the past, and very often, as far as I know, it is a book dealer or book dealers who do the spotting of that character in public. Oh, do you know who's back in town? Okay. However, next slide, please. Institutions regularly cover these things up. This is very frustrating, but it happens. And it happens because of embarrassment, right? You are a librarian and you have been sold a series of forgeries, and I can think this has happened on a number of occasions. And by the way, the gel pen Henry James was one of those. You get someone coming in, a Henry James scholar, saying, where the hell did you get that? That doesn't look genuine at all. It doesn't? Oh, you're right. Okay. If that's the case and word gets out, you are embarrassed. You could be shamed for what you've done. You've made a mistake. It's probably best that that particular item, that particular forgery disappears, finds a place in the back room where it is left indefinitely. If it gets out that you have purchased a forged item, you could lose part of your reputation. I mean, you've worked for 20 years in the Special Collections Department. You've become very respectable. You've lectured at conferences. You're a member of the Alcuin Society. I mean, things are looking up. And then it's discovered that you bought a Leonard Cohen that wasn't by Leonard Cohen. By the way, there are an increasing number of bogus Leonard Cohen signatures wandering around. Okay, you don't want to risk loss of reputation there. After all, you have bills to pay, you have a family, etc. Institutions fear losses of sponsors and donors and other supporters. a donor says, I hear that you spent 100 grand on a bunch of, British Edwardian poetry. You've got Robert Graves in there, which isn't Robert Graves, and you got a bunch of Wilfred Owen that was signed by him in 1925 when he'd been dead for a number of years. Okay, I don't think I'm willing to donate money to an institution that is so careless about its acquisitions. Okay, so you don't want that kind of thing. And of course, if you're a book dealer and you sell a forged signature of one sort or another to a customer, you could lose business on that as well. Certainly, you could lose reputation. And so there's fear of job loss and disgrace. Certainly, I know of cases where people have not been promoted. They have been moved from special collections or an archives into another position in the library, which is certainly a couple of steps lower than really they wanted. These risks have to be taken into account, and this is the reason for so many cover-ups. To be quite honest with you, I know of dozens of cover-ups. I have been told again and again that I am not to be specific, and I am not, certainly. Perhaps when I retire, I may be a little bit more open about these things. I'm not sure, however, but I understand the fear that people face when they could be embarrassed by the acquisition of forged material. Detecting forgeries. How do we detect them? What is the best way? Could we see the next slide, please, Spencer? First, provenance. This is, I don't want to say the be all and end all, but you got to know where that item is coming from. Okay. If it comes from the hands of the author itself, then you got a pretty good provenance, in fact, an excellent provenance. I refer you to the A.N. Wilson item before. I mean, as I say, I watched them sign that, so the provenance is very good there. If, however, you have doubts about provenance, that's something that requires research, especially if the item that you're thinking of buying could cost you a lot of money. You want to make sure that that provenance is solid. There has to be appropriateness of context here, language used in inscriptions, so that, for example, the language of someone like Henry James is going to be fairly formal, to Edith with effect and with respect and affection, yours, H.J. James did not say, hey, Edith, this one's for you, love, Hank. No, there has to be an appropriate language there. The language has to fit the age and has to fit, to some extent, the style, the personal style of the author. Appropriateness of production and materials. Tennyson's ballpoint pen. Certainly, yes, people might try to get away with something like that. Similarity to previously authenticated examples. Special collections librarians, archivists, and book dealers may have had access to these authenticated examples and can make a reasonably good judgment with regard to the authenticity of something presented to them, although I would have to say they would be well advised to check the provenance as well. And finally, intuition. And I know that intuition has something of a questionable reputation here, but I know of many cases where a librarian, a book dealer, does not buy something because he or she just doesn't have a good feeling about it. Okay, you could call it going with gut. Henry James would never express it that way. I will call it buyer's intuition. If something doesn't seem right, that is something that you really should go with. At the very least, it will be an inspiration for you to check the provenance even more, to get opinions from other dealers. And by the way, if you tell a forger that you're going to be looking into provenance a little bit more, or that you're going to be comparing the inscription or the marginalia to authenticated examples, in many cases that forger will simply disappear. In some cases, that forger will simply not show up again. You have the item in hand, but that forger is not going to reappear to be spotted again. Let's take a quick look at a number of items here. Next slide, please. And just go through the list. Here you have an item signed apparently by the author, Patrick Kavanagh. You see that signature on the top of the title page, July 1960. And I have verified that signature quite carefully. My intuition tells me that it is his signature too. I've always enjoyed Kavanagh's poetry here. But one thing I've got to admit is that I bought this from a library for a grand total of 25 cents. I bought it from the sales table. I took it to the librarian and I said, "Do you know what you have here?" And she said to me, "Oh, well, so what? We have a modern copy. You like that kind of thing, Guy, you keep it." So I paid my money for it, and here it is. An interesting copy. It's an association copy as well. You see the signatures of various owners who were either scholars, they were acquainted with Kavanagh of one sort, Kavanagh at one point or another. You've got the dates here. And anyway, this is an example of something that I have authenticated and believe that its appropriateness of context. The production materials are all good. Note the ink and kind of pen that the author is using, Patrick Kavanagh. The appropriateness of the language used here, and the appropriateness of presentation. Quite frankly, the library provided this. They gave it to me, and I accepted it, having told them what they had, which is really a warning to librarians. Before you put things on the sales table, maybe it's a good idea to check them out a little bit more, because if you do not do that, there could be a certain amount of embarrassment. I recall Professor Dick Frediman at UBC telling me about various items that the library had acquired, very special items, first editions of Hemingway, for example, that had been signed, but the librarians had put these works in the general collection, and so you get a nice signed Hemingway, a novel of one sort that the students have got after, and so down one margin you got irony, you got underlining all over the place. That's unfortunate. I found a copy of Edith Wharton's copy of Under the Volcano in the old Sedgwick Library at UBC that students had gone after. I think that was eventually transferred to special collections. I'm not sure of that, but again, you have a wonderful association there with notes from one of Canada's better known authors, but the librarians did not identify that item as they might have. I am not picking on librarians here. I'm a librarian myself. What I'm doing is urging librarians and archivists to be very careful when they find signatures and inscriptions and marginalia in works that have been donated, works that have been that appear on various sales tables. You don't want to be embarrassed by this kind of thing. May I have the next slide, Spencer, please? This is, I like this one. This is a George Riga inscription, and actually this book belongs to my wife. What I find interesting about this one is the provenance is guaranteed. You note how the writing is slanting there. That is because Riga signed this in the crook of his elbow. which accounts for a greater slant of the handwriting. You'll notice how quickly he signed it as well. It's still identifiable, certainly, and it's a good inscription, but as I say, fairly fast. Good provenance, no problem with intuition. The contexts are right. This we are prepared to accept as genuine. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is something of actually a work in progress. This is something of a work in progress, a thriller by an author. My intuition tells me that this is a genuine inscription, but I have not checked it out yet. I will probably take this item with me back to London and read it on the plane, I suppose, but I'll take it to a friend of mine at Waddesdon's, who is a friend of Guy Walters, and I can verify it that way. It looks good, but I don't have extensive examples of his other writing. I've got some quickly signed title pages and half titles. A couple of them are paperbacks, but nothing quite like this. This is an association copy, as you see. He has signed it to someone whom he knows reasonably well. My intuition tells me that it is genuine, but as I say, it takes a little bit more research. Next slide, please. Okay, the process here for people who work in special collections, avoidance of quick purchases, numero uno. Don't impulse buy things that seem to be genuine. Give yourself some time, do a good background check regarding the supplier and the reputation of that supplier. Keep your ears open with regard to previous source forgeries. An informed analysis of the item to be purchased. Comprehensive research these days can be certainly easier than it was years ago with email and with scanning. Advice from informed sources. There are a number of book dealers I would certainly trust. There are a number of librarians and archivists I would trust as well. Their opinions are well worthwhile. And there's also a risk analysis here, the likelihood of fraud. I point out that some authors are all too often the target of forgers. I've mentioned Leonard Cohen. That's a recent one. We're seeing a lot of that right now, sold to rather innocent buyers. All right, if you're a librarian or book dealer or archivist, you have to be aware that there is a trend now in the forgery of that particular author. It's interesting, it seems to me, and this again is anecdotal, that once an author dies, his or her work starts to be forged. His signature, her signature tends to be forged more often. Again, I don't have good statistics on this. This is simply what I have seen over the years. Next slide, please. Now, I have talked at some length about forgeries and how we can be sure one way or another what is genuine and what is not. I've decided to reach the end. This is the penultimate slide, I think, with something I know to be absolutely genuine. You may recognize that monogram. This is by William Makepeace Thackeray. How do I know that it is genuine? Aside from the fact that I've seen a number of Thackeray's specimens of his handwriting, this is a monogram that was carved into his grave slab in Kensal Green Cemetery. Apparently he asked for this to be inscribed there, so you know exactly who he is, and it is a very, very good copy of his monogram. This is truly written in stone. It is really as genuine as you could get. Thackeray, of course, did not do the actual carving himself. He didn't have a chance to, but this is a very good example of a monograph. And if you see this on particularly a piece of artwork, but also you'll find it on notes that he scribbled and pieces of correspondence, this is a good point of reference for you. Can I have the final slide, please, Spencer? Aha. Was there not one final slide? No? Okay. Well, I will sum up simply by saying, finally and at last, forged signatures and inscriptions in book by well-known and respected authors appear to be increasingly common, and we must be on our guard. Please keep in mind that such forgeries are fairly easy to carry out, and many could be somewhat difficult to detect. We don't have at our disposal the laboratories of the FBI, where they do a lot of handwriting analysis using very sophisticated tools. We don't have access to those necessarily. We keep in mind that forgers intend to make money, and they can make a great deal of money, and that they are concentrating on realizing revenue from the sale of more modern authors, that the chances of their trying to forge Magna Carta or the Luttrell Psalter are remote, to say the least. Yes, there are certain artworks that are very commonly forged. That's a topic for another lecture of one sort or another. I'm thinking in particular of Dutch 17th century still lives, which are very often forged these days. That's another issue, but that need not concern us here. What we should note is that forgers are rarely caught and prosecuted. In fact, you can go into the case law and you're not going to find very many cases that have gone through the courts here. Quite frankly, for a number of reasons. One, evidence is hard to attain, and lawyers often discourage clients from really pursuing these matters because the cost of doing so is substantial. Court time is very, very expensive. You should rely upon respectable book dealers who ascertain provenances for the items that they sell, but remember that even the most respectable and well-experienced librarian, archivist, or book dealer can be fooled by a forger, and as can experts on handwriting who work in the law enforcement field. I mentioned FBI there. I mean, they admit that things can get past them, so that there will always be a risk from forgery, bogus documents of one sort or another. That concludes my talk. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, Guy, thank you so much for that that holistic approach to fakes and forgeries. Anyone who's on the chat right now, I encourage you to send in any questions you may have. I think maybe off the top, you know, just as some questions may come in, I have just one that comes from the kind of scenario you presented, which is a sort of an impasse. You know, there are materials in special collections in libraries in which people are aware of the issues of authenticity with them and authentication. What you know, in an ideal world, in that kind of space outside, what would be the ideal world to get over that impasse? How do you have any kind of idea as to you know, how these could be maybe used as object lessons? What are some of your thoughts on these materials that seem to be, you know, they're in almost a purgatory or a kind of a limbo, you know? So what would be your thoughts on a way of perhaps coming clean on these materials?
In the first place, I'd start by saying what we need is more training, and I'm sure I'm talking to the converted here, with regard to bibliography and textual criticism, and this for librarians and archivists. I think that the study of handwriting and various aspects of manuscript and document creation should be offered by our what used to be called library schools, now which are called iSchools. It's unfortunate. I think mine might have been the last generation that went through. I could take a number of courses with regard to the topics that I have discussed as they pertain to bibliographic studies, as they're connected to these things. Now that is unfortunately rather rare. As to the discovery of bogus items, you're a librarian, say, in a special collection, and you come across an edition of Tennyson's Maud, and the title page is signed with a ballpoint pen. What do you do in that case? I think the first step is to inform your colleagues in the department. Inform that you have suspicions about this. If that is the case, I mean, and every case is going to be different here. That might have been part of a collection for many decades, in which case, you know, opening it up for public scrutiny might not be necessarily in the best interests of the institution. I would put that in the back room, and if I, you know, was dealing with someone interested in Tennyson or forgeries of one sort or another, I might show that person that object. Again, I take this on a case-by-case sense here. It's hard to generalize about this kind of stuff. The detection of these things can cause real grief. I can tell you that. And as I say, when people are frightened of losing their jobs, losing their reputations, they don't want it to go anywhere. I have made myself extremely unpopular by bringing certain cases to the attention of those in charge. I have been told by a certain professor, who will remain nameless, that if I speak out about certain things, that will be my career. He will make sure that I find it very, very difficult to get any further business, etc. I've had that kind of thing. So you understand the difficulties involved here. You say it's an impasse, to which I would say in the end, it's the passage of time. Forgeries age just like any other signature or inscription. And perhaps in 50 or 75 or 100 years, there won't be such controversy arising from that, from a mistake that a librarian made generations ago. Okay, that's not an entirely satisfactory answer, but quite frankly, as I consider the cases that I've dealt with, it's about the best I can do under these circumstances.
We have a couple questions coming through the chat here. One from that says, what do you think of Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, in which he talks about the replication crisis?
Well, to be honest with you, I have not read that book.
Okay.
So I cannot answer that question. But if it's any kind of answer at all, I mentioned quick purchases. You are not obliged to buy something quickly. If you want to take your time on something, you do that. A slow consideration of a purchase of an item for your collection is probably prudent, okay? Forgers and frauds rely upon speed and impulse buying in too many cases. Mm-hmm. And I urge you to slow down a bit. Mm. And I look forward to reading that book. I have a copy of it behind me, actually, and I haven't got to it so far.
Yeah, I actually see it in the top corner there.
It's not signed, though, unfortunately.
Another question just came in. If I have books that I would like to donate to special collections at a university, how can I authenticate my donation? Is it enough to explain that I saw the books being signed? What more can be said to convince others that what you are presenting is genuine?
Good question. If you have seen that those items have been signed, that is, as I point out, excellent provenance. But if the university special collections is going to be careful, they might examine those inscriptions a little bit more and perhaps get the opinion of someone, a book dealer, for example, or another librarian who is well familiar with that particular signature. Really, you can't be too careful about certain signatures here. If you actually saw the person sign that book, you could provide a letter saying that you actually saw the author signing the work, and include that with your donation. That's something, at least. I'd still prefer a book dealer, a knowledgeable book dealer, or another librarian to have a good look at these things, and so that if you watched, I don't know, Hugh McLennan sign a copy of The Watch That Ends the Night, that's fine. Yes, that sounds genuine enough, but it might be nice to have a second opinion. Also keep in mind that the people around you, if they are cautious, can be 99% certain, but not necessarily 100% certain.
I have another a kind of comment question here in the chat. Is it part of the solution that a simple signature's little, if anything to do with the value? And then it goes on to say, isn't an unsigned Margaret Atwood rare?
That's that's a good joke, but an old one. Bill Hoffer used to go on about a rare unsigned Irving Layton. He said he was always in the market for this, but he never found one. Right. I think there was an occasion when Irving Layton read his poetry at UBC, and I think, according to Hoffer, Layton dropped by Falstaff Books, where Hoffer was the proprietor, and Hoffer told him to stop signing these books. A simple signature bibliographically is, in my humble opinion, I mean, it's nice to have, certainly, if it's genuine, but there may be points in the particular edition, or the state, or impression of the book you're dealing with. I'm thinking of Hemingway's work here, where, yes, I would like to see that title page of The Sun Also Rises signed, but there are impressions of that novel that contain interesting points bibliographically that, to me, would be even more interesting. You have to take this again on a case-by-case basis, certainly, and it's going to vary from author to author. A simple signature, in the case of someone like Margaret Atwood, might not be all that special. It might have sentimental interest for you. On the other hand, you have some authors who usually avoid signing anything. I think of Salinger, for example, who hated any kind of public exposure. Quite frankly, if you presented a signed Salinger to me, I would be inclined to say automatically that there was something suspicious about that. He was a very, very private kind of person. So again, case by case, a signature is not always the most interesting part of an item for sale, but it can, in many instances, increase the price, which is why the forgers use them in their business.
I think we'll probably end off with one more question here for the evening. And here, the question is, at least a couple of fiction authors, so I've heard, will sign books mailed to them. Perhaps such an author might have an assistant who does secretarial signatures for the author. Are there known cases like this?
Yes. You have cases where an author is in ill health, and someone will sign for that person. I have a a biography of a premier of British Columbia, for example, that premier was ill at the time, and so his wife signed these off for him. And that kind of thing is common enough. Still, I would be very, very careful with that kind of thing. You know, as authors get older and their health deteriorates, yes, you can expect that you might expect that kind of thing. But if you brought me anything like that, I would automatically look to the provenance, quite frankly, and be very, very sure of that sort of thing. Yeah, there is one final point here that is being investigated by a librarian in the United States. You know, authors sign these works and things like that, and they pick the thing up, the book up, and yeah, I'll sign it for. Where the hell is the title? Okay, fine, I'll sign it here. Give me your pen. Sign, and on the title page, on the half title, on the fly leaves, there are fingerprints, right? In fact, according to the researcher, you get items that could be potentially used for DNA analysis. There's a little bit of dandruff, for example, or perhaps a hair follicle or something like that. It's the fingerprints that you find. And actually, fingerprints are really a great way to identify if the author has had anything to do with that book. That is an area that really is for future consideration here. But rest assured, there is a librarian in the States looking into it. I'm kind of interested in this too, because I've seen books with several fingerprints, which I suspect are not only from the author, but also from some of the owners and associations who are rather interesting.
Great. Well, Guy, I want to take an opportunity to thank you very much for taking the time to put this together. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And I hope you're able to join us next month. We continue the virtual lecture series, and it's going to be starting a little bit earlier than in the month. So it will be Thursday, June 10th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And it will be Richard Hopkins, who was the gentleman who gave the introduction at the beginning, also a member of the Alcuan Society Board. And his topic is the novel in woodcuts, a wordless narrative. So the registration is open for that if you go through our site. I can also put the link through on the chat right after the meeting here. And so it is live. And if you have any further questions about the Society, please do get in touch with us through our website. Again, in the chat, alcuansociety.com. Thanks again for joining us this evening, and stay safe, and hopefully we see you next month.